they look for what's common to all the things that are humorous. You will never find out unless you look at the effect that it causes in brains. There's nothing intrinsically sexy. I know it seems like there is, guys, but there isn't anything intrinsically sexy about this. If there were, there would be a real problem for evolution, as that is how to get chips to mate. Maybe hallucination. No. Just wire up chimps to love that look. And they do. And that's how nature solves these problems. Not with intrinsic properties, but with exploiting relational properties. Same thing is true of humor. Everybody notices the cultural relativity of humor, that humor doesn't, or at least a lot of humor, doesn't travel. I'm going to demonstrate this with a joke, an example from Korea. See if you think this is funny. Well, you do! Oh, darn. Well, but now I'm going to translate it into English so you can see why it's funny. Who in their right mind mixes salt water and clean water back and forth knowing that his mother will give him a beating? That's not funny at all, is it? But we have it on good testimony, expert testimony, that this is very funny to certain groups of Korean teenagers. And in the book, we explain why it's funny. Of course, it isn't funny for us. But this feature of humor, that it doesn't travel well. It's not that Koreans have this weird sense of humor. Their sense of humor is just like ours. It's that Koreans have different resources than we do, and we have different resources than they do. And I'll show you how that depends on that. Order is very important in humor. This is just, again, talking about the phenomenology of humor. This man walks up to a hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." Oh, and the man's a Buddhist. You got the wrong word. By the way, somebody just sent me the other day a video clip of an Australian television presenter interviewing the Dalai Lama, and tells him this joke. And the Dalai Lama. And it just doesn't work at all. So of course it's very funny. Meditate. Timing is important too, and I'm going to illustrate this with a wonderful, funny moment by my friend John McCarthy, who with Minsky was one of the founders of AI, and John in fact created the term artificial intelligence, and he's a wonderful imp of a fellow. And one time we were at a conference together, and the speaker at the beginning of the talk was talking, and somebody in the back of the room yells, "Louder!" So the speaker raises his voice a little bit more, and John yells out, "Funnier!" And the timing was perfect. I mean, if he waited just the right number of beats, brought the house down. So what I've done there is just simply remind you of some of the features that have to be explained, but what must quod erat demonstrare, what has to be explained. So now I'm going to show you how the humor detection mechanism works in slow motion. And here we need a concept which we take from Gilles Fauconnier, mental spaces, from his 1985 book. Was a colleague of Dan's and Pierre's, and then went to San Diego, where he is now. And mental spaces, should understand these as constructed on the fly in our minds to maintain local intraspace consistency, so that if you introduce indirect discourse or a fiction, we create a space within a space. This is a sort of a logical structure. These are not the same as Minsky frames or Shank scripts, if you're familiar with these ideas from artificial intelligence, but they're playing, in some ways, a similar role. So this is an innovation in cognitive architecture. There's no particular reason to think that any other species has anything quite like a Fauconnier mental space or needs one. And this more or less illustrates a mental space. What if I had some ice cream? Wouldn't that be awesome? No, stop. Wait. Great, you've trapped us in a hypothetical situation. Maybe if I had a knife, I could cut our way free. I mean, you can build up different mental spaces. This is actually not that funny, but it illustrates the idea of mental spaces. So they're created on the fly, and they're created in consciousness. It's very important. Involuntarily. And they're furnished by what we might call an unconscious triage mechanism. As you go through the day, you've got a mental space or two, because somebody's telling you about something that happened down the street, you're keeping that space different from the one you're in, and so forth and so on. And you do this all without any thought, without having to do it. You don't have to think about how you're doing it. And the unconscious triage mechanism is furnishing these mental spaces with various propositions. And it inserts defaults, oversimplifications, and so forth into those mental spaces by a process that we call JITSA, just-in-time spreading activation. This is our way of dealing with Minsky frames and Schenck scripts, is to say, no, there's not, these things aren't sitting in memory already constructed, they're created on the fly as you're thinking. And this is the basic inference mechanism in the exploration of mental spaces. I'm going to go swiftly over this. If you don't get it, then you might want to read the book and get the more detailed version of it. And this is what doesn't so much solve as dissolve the frame problem. This is how we generate, by and large, the right expectations. But fortunately for humor, we don't all generate only the right ones, we also generate some wrong ones. And it's these wrong ones that matter. It takes the incoming semantic contents from the world and inserts them along with relevant knowledge from long-term memory and first-order inferences drawn from both. So this is cranking away all the time. And these contain oversimplifications that must be debugged. Here I want to pick up an idea from a wonderful book, Sweet Anticipation, by David Huron, neuroscientist and musicologist. I think the single best book on the brain and music that has been written. And in it, he introduces something which we call the Huron trampoline, which is the idea of what he calls limbic contrast. Pleasure is increased when a positive response follows a negative response, while surprise is biologically bad. Surprise nevertheless plays a pivotal role in human emotional experience. Surprise acts as an emotional amplifier, and we sometimes intentionally use this amplifier to boost positive emotions. Remember, this is a debugging system. Well, it depends on first discovering a mistake. Well, it's always a downer to discover a mistake. Oh, heck. Oh, darn. But then, if you get the timing right, when the oh darn, oh good, because it's not so bad after all, because you see your way out of it, and that's the Huron trampoline. And he has, I didn't bother the slide because I wasn't going to have the time to talk, but he has a whole neurophysiological account of how important the timing is, what the dynamics are of various aspects of expectation and so forth. Now, it makes a funny noise, these clowns say. One of the insights that led Matthew to this theory was one that at first I thought, nothing, this is not important. But his insight was that we have two senses of the word funny. There's funny ha-ha and there's funny ha or funny uh-oh. As in the previous slide, it's making a funny noise. Or there's the, why don't cannibals eat clowns? Because they taste funny. Matthew thought, I don't think this is an accident, I think there's something deep. And we began to look around, he began to look around, and he found other languages which had the same duality. Mexican Spanish, Argentine Spanish, French, German, Greek, Hungarian, Russian, you know, we've got a whole bunch of examples we found. Including, I noticed, Romanian. I don't know what they are, but you can tell me afterwards if we're right. We were informed that there was a there's Romanian words that can either mean funny, hilarious, or funny, uh-oh. Is that right? Can't remember if we have it in the book or not. We'll talk about that later. I'll do some more research on that. Key to the Huron trampoline is what we call covert entry. Remember that this triage process is unsupervised. Mental spaces get easily contaminated, and they get contaminated by premises and inferences that enter without notice. You're not aware that they're coming in, they just come in automatically. And this is a key thing. This is why a joke is ruined if you have to prepare people by explicitly giving them a key fact. This is why that Korean joke isn't funny. Because there's ambient mutual knowledge among these Korean kids which makes that funny. And if I explain that ambient knowledge to you, you'll be able to understand just barely why that would be funny. But of course it won't be funny to you. By the way, I've just been talking with a neuroscientist who wants to use this feature to, Adrian Owen, I mentioned it before, to test for humor. Very simple. He's going to get a bunch of, we were just talking about this in Amsterdam 2 days ago, he's going to get a bunch of one-liner jokes that are funny, and then precede them in the scanner with a sentence. And the sentence will either be irrelevant, or it will remind the person in the scanner of the fact that the joke depends on, destroying the joke, making it not funny at all. Okay. And this is also how joke getting differs from regular problem solving. The aha phenomenon of regular problem solving is very similar to the pleasure we take from solving a puzzle. It's very close to humor, but it doesn't involve the covert entry. Or if it does, some puzzles have a sort of covert entry trick to them, then they tend to be funny. When you get the answer, you laugh. So, we're ready to say when humor occurs, except first I have to correct it and say not humor in general, but first-person humor, first-person proto-humor. This is the basic humor on which other humor depends. It occurs when an active element in a mental space that has covertly entered that space for one reason or another, and is taken to be true, and is epistemically committed within that space, is diagnosed to be false in that space, simply in the sense that it is the loser in an epistemic reconciliation process. Now that's a lot of words. If you understand the whole model, you see why that's a pretty good summary. Oh, and then there's a fifth condition, trivially. The discovery is not accompanied by any strong negative emotional valence, which would swamp any humor. Then what's higher order humor? That's proto-humor. Higher order humor plus X gives us humor of all kinds, and X, I'm happy to say, is the intentional stance, which I claim also is a sort of an instinctual thing we have of interpreting anything complicated as an agent. So in humor, the first-person perspective on one's own bugs is the basic mechanism. So humor in the original case is discovering the mistakes in yourself. The intentional stance then obliges us and permits us to appreciate the bugs of others. And that's what yields the superiority effects of superiority. There's the in-group out-group effects, mechanical effects, and so forth. All the rest of the effects discussed by other humor theorists really depend on this secondary higher order type of humor. So, summary. Assumptions covertly entered into our mental spaces carry with them an automatic pleasure amplifier that kicks in when our ongoing quest for anticipation discovers and promptly resolves conflicts in those assumptions. Now, if you know the humor literature, you see that this is a variety of an incongruity resolution theory, but it has some bells and whistles that those things don't have. This intensified reward, which probably only human beings experience, has then become an autonomous target, attracting efforts to design ever more potent and effective stimuli to obtain a reward. Humor then is an integral